Madame Eight Legs loomed high above the forest canopy, her towering form eclipsing the moonlight. Though just a holographic manifestation, she radiated overwhelming power. She opened her jaws wide and unleashed a deafening screech that echoed across the entire forest. The sheer force of her cry caused the ground to shake and trees to topple like brittle sticks. Below her were shattered trunks and debris scattered in all directions. The triplets moved with remarkable speed, weaving through the chaos and avoiding incoming strikes. Vikir, with his bow gripped tightly in one hand, darted across the ruined terrain. Sinclair clutched her magic staff, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she struggled to steady her breath. At the front of the group, Granola was the only one screaming, panicked, wild-eyed, and entirely overwhelmed by the monstrous presence bearing down on them. Lovegood stood frozen, her complexion pale as the color drained from her face at the sight of the towering S-ranked spider. She had no idea what kind of creature this was. Her companions, alarmed by her stunned silence, began to panic and urged her to move, shouting that they needed to escape immediately. While fleeing, Vikir turned his head slightly toward Madame Eight Legs. The moment he laid eyes on her, he understood. The source of the ominous sensation he had felt ever since entering the forest within the tower had been her presence. Before his regression, stories about the madam were scattered fragments of a legend passed down through generations. It wasn't until extensive investigation and multiple revisions that she was formally catalogued in the Empire's Monster Encyclopedia. In other words, not even the Magic Tower had ever properly encountered her before. Vikir now realized her appearance here wasn't just coincidence. It was because of his influence that this happened. Suddenly, one of Madame Eight Legs' limbs shot forward, surging with mana and barreling straight toward Lovegood. She stood frozen, her grip on her staff loosening as it slipped slightly in her hand. Around her, her teammates screamed her name, but their voices felt distant, muffled beneath the pounding of her own fear. Her eyes were wide, consumed by terror. Her body refused to move. She couldn't believe it. She was about to be eliminated without even lifting a finger in defense. Just before the monstrous limb could strike her, one of her companions, a broad-shouldered girl wielding a sword and shield, leapt in front of her. Planting herself between Lovegood and the oncoming attack, she raised her shield high. Gritting her teeth, she glanced back at Lovegood with a desperate look and shouted for her to get out of the way. The impact landed with devastating force. Despite her best efforts, the burly girl was flung aside as if she were made of paper. Lovegood stood frozen, barely raising her arm to shield her face as Madame Eight Legs' mana-infused leg swept past her by mere inches. When she finally turned around, her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes went wide, stunned by what she saw. The sheer power of the strike had sent Anna, her friend, hurtling through the air until she slammed into a tree with a sickening thud. Anna's shield lay shattered on the ground, and her motionless body slumped beneath it, unconscious. Madame Eight Legs loomed in place, her many eyes narrowing as she surveyed the forest, mandibles twitching with anticipation. A low, guttural click escaped her mouth, saliva dripping as her senses locked onto the scattered body heat of nearby students. Without hesitation, the beast surged forward, a blur of monstrous limbs tearing through the forest. She thundered past Vikir and Sinclair, who stood frozen, stunned into silence as the wind from her charge whipped past them. Granola collapsed onto the ground, landing on his rear with a thud, his face a mask of disbelief and confusion. He sat there trembling, struggling to process the fact that Madame Eight Legs had passed them by without incident. He had been certain elimination was inevitable. A few steps away, Vikir stood tall, his fist clenched at his side. The glint of his glasses hit his eyes, but his focus was sharp, fixed on the monstrous silhouette of Madame Eight Legs disappearing into the trees. He could tell she was hunting the other students now. Lowering his gaze, Vikir's thoughts darkened. What was the tournament management doing? There was no way something like this should have slipped through their control. An irregularity of this scale, it couldn't possibly be part of the competition. His train of thought abruptly shattered. Shouts echoed through the forest. Lovegood and her teammate rushed past him toward the fallen Anna, calling her name in desperation. Vikir turned to watch, silent. Anna lay motionless, her body scraped and battered, her HP reduced to 0. Yet she was still there, barely breathing. Lovegood stared in stunned disbelief, her mind racing. Anna's shield had broken. Her HP was gone. But why hadn't she been teleported back to the waiting room? Her remaining teammate hovered nearby, equally shaken. Confusion clouded her expression as she stared down at Anna's still form, unable to comprehend what was happening. Lovegood dropped to her knees, her staff falling beside her, hands limp in her lap. She stared at the dirt, eyes vacant, her breath shallow and ragged. Granola stepped forward cautiously. He extended a shaky hand, his voice demanding but uncertain. If their HP had hit 0, why hadn't they been taken out of the game? Where was the system? Where was the safety they were promised? Granola slapped his forehead and let out a hollow, broken laugh. Nothing made sense anymore. An S-rank monster had just appeared out of nowhere. And now, even with their HP at 0, they weren't being teleported back. His mind reeled. Why wasn't the administration stopping the competition? Why wasn't anyone doing anything? Beside him, Vikir stood motionless, eyes sharp and thoughtful, unmoved by the chaos. But Granola's panic only worsened. He dropped to his knees, fingers tangled in his hair, eyes wide with dread. The truth crashed down on him like a wave. They'd been abandoned. The system had failed. The administrators had lost control. They were on their own. Vikir finally broke his silence, his voice calm and deliberate as he told Granola to get a grip. But it was no use. Granola's breathing quickened, his screams rising in pitch, filled with pure terror. He couldn't stop himself. He couldn't calm down. He wasn't ready to die. Not here, not like this. Not forgotten in some cursed forest. Then, suddenly, the sound of rustling leaves, heavy footsteps in the underbrush. Someone or something was approaching. Dolores, Jurassico, and Hohenheim stepped out from the trees. Jurassico, his sword slung over his shoulder, eyes narrowing as they settled on Vikir. Hohenheim followed behind. Dolores's gaze swept over the group, her expression taut with concern. She took a step forward and asked if everyone was all right. Meanwhile, chaos surged through the operations room of the magic tower. Holographic displays pulsed red, alarms echoing across the chamber. Hippolyte pointed sharply at the projector, her voice cutting through the noise as she turned to the old magician. Her tone was cold and furious, demanding an explanation for why students with 0 HP weren't being returned to the lobby. One of hers was gravely injured, and she ordered the old magician to extract the girl immediately. Seeing the injured student, it became clear that immediate evacuation was critical. Professor Snape's voice rang out across the chamber, sharp and commanding, demanding the tournament be halted at once. The old magician's arrogant composure crumbled. His face went pale and his eyes widened in stunned disbelief. This wasn't possible. He refused to believe that a creature like that existed in the forest. But deep down, the truth hit him. Everything Professor Snape had warned about was real. Gripping the edge of the console, he muttered through clenched teeth, lies. If Madame Eight Legs hadn't appeared, the magic tower would have claimed victory. Hearing the old magician's words, Professor Snape didn't wait for explanations. Teeth clenched, he shot to his feet and grabbed the old magician by the collar, fury blazing in his eyes. His voice thundered through the operations room as he demanded to know whether the old magician intended to kill every student out there, or if he would stop the tournament now. For a moment, the old magician simply stared, stunned by the professor's outburst. Then, with a chilling calm, he shook his head. Calling off the tournament was no longer possible. Professor Snape's glare sharpened, but the old magician remained eerily composed. As he explained, when an entity, the magic tower itself, struggles to contain manifests, it causes a complete system overload. Once that happens, not even the administrators have full control. With rising urgency, Professor Snape demanded answers, any way to get the students out. The old magician's hand hovered over the holographic display before settling on a pulsing bright marker. He spoke gravely. If the students managed to kill Madame Eight Legs, the system would reset and control of the tower would be restored. Elsewhere in the forest, Dolores knelt beside the fallen Anna, healing energy radiating from her hands. Though Anna's HP shield had taken the brunt of the blow, she was only unconscious, her breathing stable. Dolores looked up and offered Lovegood a calm, reassuring smile, confirming that Anna would recover. Lovegood sank down beside them, her hands placed against her knees as she stared silently at Anna. Relieved that she was going to be fine. Dolores remained seated, her gaze fixed in the direction where Madame Eight Legs had gone into the forest. Distant echoes of destruction, shattered trees, panicked cries, signaled the monster had found new victims. All she could do was hope the other students had somehow escaped. Behind her, Vikir stood motionless, his expression unreadable, the reflection of his glasses hiding his eyes. He stared at the ground, thoughts heavy with brutal clarity. Madame Eight Legs wasn't just a monster. She was a Class S calamity, a monster categorized alongside natural disasters. Her presence alone was enough to crush the human spirit and extinguish the will to fight. Vikir recognized that this wasn't the same Madame Eight Legs he had faced outside the magic tower. She wasn't using her poison, and many of her eyes were gone, leaving her with numerous blind spots. Her once sturdy body was now riddled with holes. Though it was only a theory, Vikir suspected this madam had been summoned by the magic tower as a replica of the real one, a shadow of the madam from the past. He stared ahead, analyzing how best to bring down this S-class monster. But even if the others could tell the difference between the real madam and this imitation, it wouldn't matter. His gaze drifted to Lovegood, who sat motionless with her head bowed, then to Hohenheim, whose expression had turned grim. They couldn't win, not even against this weakened version. Finally, Vikir looked toward Jurassico and considered whether he should focus on helping them shake off their fear and regain the will to fight. He clenched his fist. If he wanted to reach his goal and prevent further casualties, then he would need power, much more than he had now. Then a sudden movement shattered the stillness. Vikir looked up, surprised. It was Lovegood. She had risen to her feet, staff in hand, brushing debris from her skirt. She couldn't remain frozen in despair any longer. Anna, her junior, had nearly died because of her own hesitation. Lovegood's eyes burned with renewed purpose. She would go after Madame, not just to avenge Anna, but to stop the creature from hurting anyone else. Her resolve blazed through the remnants of fear and guilt. She was going to make the monster pay. After all, she was the president of the Mischira Women's University. As Lovegood started toward the path Madame had taken, a blade suddenly slammed into the ground before her, halting her steps. She scowled, only to see Jurassico standing there, emboldened by her fierce resolve. With a half-smirk, he told her that spirit like hers belonged with the Viragians. Resting his hand on the hilt of his sword, he declared he would follow her, fight alongside her. Dolores stepped forward next, her face tight with tension but her stance unwavering. More than anyone, she understood. They couldn't afford to lose another student. Lovegood turned, her expression unreadable as she silently took them in. Then slowly, all eyes shifted to Hohenheim, who stood apart from the group, still and unreadable. The unspoken question lingered. Would he join them or remain a spectator in the shadows? Lovegood didn't want to admit it, but they needed his strength. Without it, their chances were slim. To everyone's surprise, a slow smile curved across Hohenheim's face, moonlight catching on the edge of his glasses. With practiced ease, he adjusted the frames and, despite his usual indifference, conceded that while the situation was undeniably irritating, he was willing to agree to a temporary truce for the sake of the Magic Tower's victory. Vikir watched them all. He had misjudged them. These weren't just students. They were the same great heroes who had once stood at the vanguard during the era of destruction, unflinching in the face of annihilation. A faint laugh escaped him. Without looking back, he called to the Baskerville triplets, who had been huddled close behind. He instructed them to listen carefully, eyes sharpening with urgency. They would need to relay his words to Lovegood and the others. His expression darkened as he began to outline the method to bring down the madam. The forest quaked with each step Madame Eight Legs took as she chased the fleeing students. Panic filled the air. Screams and frantic shouts echoed as they urged each other to run. Among them, A Colossio student sprinted beside a girl from the Mischira Women's University. Both of their faces were etched with terror. Then the girl stumbled, her legs buckled beneath her, and she hit the ground hard. The boy skidded to a halt, spinning around with wide, frantic eyes. She reached out a trembling hand, voice cracking as she said she had twisted her ankle and begged him to help her. Tears welled up as her body trembled with fear. He looked at her just for a moment. His face fell, eyes shadowed with dread. His breath caught in his throat and then, with a choked apology, he turned and ran, leaving her behind as Madame Eight Legs closed in. Madame loomed over the girl, jagged legs raised and ready to strike. Paralyzed by fear, the girl broke into sobs, tears streaming down her face as the weight of betrayal sank in. She couldn't believe the Colossio boy had left her behind. Just as one of Madame's legs came down to impale her, a blast of fire exploded between them, crashing against the spider's head. Smoke billowed outward, clouding Madame's vision and momentarily shielding the girl. But as the haze began to clear, the monstrous spider stood tall and unscathed, its armored carapace untouched, the flames dancing uselessly across its surface. It was Hohenheim who had unleashed the blast of fire. His expression was sharp with focus as he noted that insect-type monsters were typically vulnerable to fire magic. Yet the flames had done nothing. The spider remained untouched. Unfazed, Hohenheim kept his staff raised, already channeling a second blast. A faint smile tugged at his lips. This was exactly what he expected from an S-class monster. Behind him, Dolores, Sinclair, and Granola stepped forward, weapons at the ready.
Thanks for watching the latest part from the voice of Manhwa. Subscribe for more content and don't forget to comment below what you want to see in the future. Like and share for more.